Be ready, because the moment that quietly changes everything almost never arrives with the noise people expect. There is a reason you found yourself here before the month has revealed its biggest headlines. For a very long time, many people have imagined that those chosen to move in the first wave must be the brightest souls, the most recognizable teachers, or the individuals who appear spiritually extraordinary to the outside world. Yet the opening energy of August tears down that illusion before it has a chance to settle. The people who move first are rarely the ones standing beneath the spotlight. They are not separated from everyone else by status, influence, or visible spiritual achievement. They are separated by something far simpler and far more demanding. They decide to take a step while certainty has not yet arrived. They allow movement to begin before proof appears. If something inside you recognizes that truth, then do not dismiss it as coincidence. Pay attention, because this message may be speaking directly to you as one of the first wave volunteers. Every transformational month requires individuals who are willing to enter unfamiliar territory before its defining moments unfold. Many people believe that August truly begins with Lion's Gate, or with the eclipse, or with whichever powerful date has already been circled on the calendar. They assume those events create the transformation. But pause for a moment and imagine if every single person waited until those milestones appeared before making a different choice. Nothing would actually begin during those celebrated moments. Those cosmic events would simply illuminate a current that had already started flowing beneath the surface. That hidden current is why the first wave exists. Their purpose has never been to stand above anyone else or to claim greater importance. Their role is much quieter, yet infinitely more essential. They become the opening page that allows the rest of the story to exist. Think about the beginning of a remarkable book. The first chapter is rarely where the greatest revelation occurs. It usually does not contain the final lesson or the most unforgettable turning point. Even so, every later chapter depends on what was quietly established at the beginning. Remove those first pages, and the entire journey loses its foundation. August unfolds in exactly the same way. Before the month reaches the dates everyone talks about, a relatively small group of people begins creating movement where there previously seemed to be none. They choose commitment before excitement appears. They make decisions before certainty feels comfortable. They continue walking while much of the collective is still watching the calendar, waiting for permission to begin. Without realizing it, they create a path that becomes easier for countless others to follow. They are not carrying the month because they possess greater value. They carry the beginning because every meaningful transformation requires someone willing to become the first step. Most people imagine that a spiritual awakening announces itself through overwhelming emotion. They expect an instant flood of inspiration, unmistakable signs from the universe, or a profound feeling of divine connection. Yet the earliest volunteers often encounter something much quieter and surprisingly practical. The first signal is rarely about what suddenly enters your life. Instead, it appears through something that can no longer remain unfinished. Perhaps there is a conversation you have postponed for weeks. Perhaps there is a decision you continue placing somewhere beyond tomorrow. Maybe an unfinished project has been waiting silently while you promised yourself you would return to it later. Nothing spectacular seems to have happened, yet delaying it begins to feel heavier than completing it. That subtle change is what separates this energy from ordinary motivation. Motivation rises and falls with emotion. It depends on confidence, excitement, or the mood of the day. August does not operate according to those rules. Instead, it quietly dissolves your willingness to keep unnecessary delays alive. The first action is not born because fear suddenly disappears. It happens because remaining where you are finally demands more energy than taking one honest step forward. That is why the first wave often appears completely ordinary to everyone watching from the outside. They are not making dramatic declarations or trying to persuade the world that something extraordinary has begun. They simply start completing the things their previous self continued postponing. One unfinished responsibility finally reaches completion. One difficult conversation is no longer avoided. One neglected commitment quietly disappears from the list. Then another follows, and another after that. At first, the change seems almost invisible. Only a handful of people appear to be moving differently, while life continues exactly as it always has for nearly everyone else. It becomes incredibly easy to believe that nothing unusual is taking place. Then, almost without warning, August reaches a point where the atmosphere begins to shift. People who could not make up their minds suddenly know which direction to choose. Opportunities emerge in places that seemed empty only weeks before. Coincidences become too consistent to dismiss as random chance. Fresh pathways reveal themselves precisely when familiar ones no longer feel aligned. It almost feels as though the entire month suddenly discovers its natural rhythm. Yet this is where so many people misunderstand what they are witnessing. They believe the month became powerful overnight. The truth is much quieter than that. The momentum had already been building beneath the surface long before anyone noticed it. The greatest transformations rarely begin when the crowd finally turns its attention toward them. They begin while almost nobody is paying attention. That has always been the purpose of the first wave. They were never meant to become the main event. They were always meant to become the unseen beginning that made every extraordinary moment that followed possible. What many people never realize is that the purpose of the first wave was never to become the center of attention. Their responsibility has always been far quieter than that. They exist to create the first ripple long before anyone recognizes that the water has begun to move. By the time the second wave begins sensing that something about August feels different, countless invisible choices have already been made behind the curtain. The month has been unfolding in silence, while most people were still waiting for an unmistakable signal. This is why every major shift seems to explode into existence without warning. It appears sudden only because the majority of people recognize momentum after it has already gathered enough strength to become impossible to overlook. The arrival of the second wave is not determined by a particular square on the calendar. It begins when enough individuals have already stepped forward that the direction of the collective can finally be felt by everyone else. Only then does August slowly uncover what it had been preparing from its very first breath. This is also why one of the greatest traps during the opening days of the month is surprisingly subtle. It is the temptation to convince yourself that you should already feel spiritually elevated. The moment people hear that the first wave has begun moving, many immediately turn their attention inward with unnecessary intensity. They begin analyzing every emotion, every passing thought, every unexpected coincidence, searching for evidence that something extraordinary is happening specifically to them. Without noticing it, they slowly replace authentic experience with performance. Instead of allowing transformation to unfold naturally, they begin trying to manufacture it. They force themselves to appear peaceful while frustration still lives inside them. They pretend they have become detached, even though their heart remains deeply invested. They convince themselves that every ordinary moment must hide some profound mystical message, simply because they fear they might otherwise be missing the experience. Yet the first wave is not defined by people who suddenly become radiant, mysterious, or permanently serene. More often than not, the deepest changes arrive wearing the clothes of ordinary life. They appear when someone finally completes a responsibility that has been delayed for far too long. They emerge when interest quietly fades from a direction that no longer carries genuine life. They become visible through a practical decision that once felt too uncomfortable to make. None of these moments match the dramatic image many people have built around spiritual ascension. That is exactly why they are so easy to overlook. Real transformation frequently passes unnoticed, because people become preoccupied with acting out the version of change they imagined, instead of recognizing the version that is actually happening. The desire to feel ascended can quietly reverse the entire process because it transforms an honest internal evolution into an external performance. Instead of responding sincerely to reality, people begin selecting their reactions according to how they believe an awakened person should behave. Every decision becomes filtered through an imagined spiritual identity rather than through genuine awareness. Ironically, the more effort someone spends trying to appear like the finished result, the less attention they give to the subtle evidence proving that the transformation has already begun. August is not asking you to feel extraordinary from morning until night. It is asking something much more honest. It asks whether you can recognize the small ways your actions have already changed without forcing yourself to become a character inside your own spiritual story. Those who belong to the first wave may still experience uncertainty. They may still become irritated. They may still wake up feeling exhausted or disappointed. The difference is not that those emotions disappear. The difference is that those emotions no longer possess enough authority to stop the decision that must be made. That is where genuine ascension quietly reveals itself. It is not an endless emotional high. It is the ability to keep choosing what is true, even when the special feeling everyone expects never arrives. There is another quality that often distinguishes the first volunteers, although many people misunderstand it when they witness it from the outside. Once these individuals recognize with complete clarity that a particular path no longer belongs in their future, they stop trying to keep it alive. This does not mean they run away every time life becomes uncomfortable or abandon meaningful work simply because progress slows down. They understand something that many others struggle to recognize. There is a profound difference between a difficult road and one that has already reached its natural ending. A difficult road still contains forward movement, even if every step requires patience. A completed road demands endless explanations, repeated compromises, and increasing amounts of energy simply to preserve the illusion that it still has somewhere to go. Many people remain trapped because they believe the time they have already invested obligates them to continue. They spend month after month trying to rescue an old vision only because they once believed it would succeed. They create new deadlines, rewrite expectations, and promise themselves that one final attempt will somehow restore what has already reached its limit. The first wave responds in an entirely different way once the truth becomes impossible to ignore. They do not wait until the ending becomes obvious to everyone around them. They do not require public confirmation, dramatic collapse, or undeniable proof before stepping away. They choose to leave while others continue insisting that the situation is only temporary. That decision is not an act of impatience. It is an expression of wisdom. True wisdom is not measured only by knowing where additional effort should be invested. It is also measured by recognizing the exact moment when effort itself has become another method of avoiding reality. This is one of the hidden reasons why August appears to accelerate so dramatically for certain people. It is not necessarily because the universe has decided to reward them with more opportunities than anyone else. The difference is far more practical. They stop exhausting themselves through endless negotiations with circumstances that have already revealed their limits. The moment that unnecessary resistance disappears, the energy that had been trapped inside yesterday naturally becomes available for tomorrow, allowing the path ahead to open with a speed that seems mysterious to everyone who never saw where the real momentum actually began. The moment you release what has already reached its natural conclusion, something remarkable happens without demanding attention. The empty space left behind does not remain empty for long. It quietly becomes available for a direction that could never have appeared while your hands were still occupied with what no longer belonged to you. From the perspective of those watching from the outside, that decision can seem impulsive, even reckless. They may wonder why anyone would walk away before a situation completely falls apart. They may believe it would have been wiser to wait for undeniable evidence, for visible failure, or for a dramatic ending that everyone could recognize. Yet the first volunteers do not require collapse before they allow themselves to move on. They recognize completion long before destruction announces it to the world. They are able to sense that a chapter has already finished, while everything still appears stable on the surface. This quiet recognition is one of the unusual qualities that August quietly honors. The month favors those who are willing to stop carrying unnecessary weight before everyone else can clearly see that the burden has already become impossible to justify. Another reason so many people overlook life-changing openings is surprisingly simple. They expect important opportunities to introduce themselves as important from the very first moment. They imagine dramatic invitations, unmistakable signs, perfect timing, and experiences that instantly announce themselves as the answer they have been searching for. They expect transformation to arrive wearing unmistakable clothing. August, however, may choose an entirely different approach. Its earliest opportunities can arrive hidden inside responsibilities that seem almost insignificant. They may appear through invitations that feel inconvenient, unfinished ideas that seem too ordinary to deserve attention, or simple choices that appear incapable of changing anything meaningful. Some of these openings may even resemble interruptions because they ask for effort long before they offer any visible reward. That is the exact point where countless people quietly walk away. They measure an opportunity according to how exciting it feels during its arrival, instead of recognizing where it may eventually lead. The first volunteers develop a different way of seeing. They understand something that is almost invisible to everyone else. True significance rarely announces itself at the beginning of the journey. What appears small today can quietly place you in an entirely different position only a few weeks later. Meanwhile, the spectacular opportunity everyone has been waiting to receive may never arrive in the form they imagined. The opportunity that ultimately transforms your life almost never introduces itself by declaring that it will transform your life. That is why August places greater value on awareness than excitement. Those who respond only when something feels powerful or dramatic may unknowingly pass by the very opening that was meant specifically for them. At the very same time, someone else quietly accepts the modest responsibility that everyone overlooked. Someone replies to the unexpected message instead of ignoring it. Someone revisits an unfinished idea that previously seemed too ordinary to matter. Someone enters a situation without fully understanding why it feels important, choosing simply to remain open instead of demanding immediate certainty. Weeks later, when the larger picture finally becomes visible, people will call the outcome perfect timing. They will admire the opportunity that eventually appeared while completely forgetting the simple, unremarkable moment that quietly created it. That difference is one of the defining characteristics of the first wave. They recognize potential before potential becomes obvious. They do not always know where the path will lead, yet they understand that something does not have to appear extraordinary in order to become deeply meaningful. Some of August's greatest beginnings may be carefully hidden inside moments so ordinary that most people would never think to remember them. Perhaps the most surprising truth about the first wave is that many of the people living it never realize they belong to it while it is happening. They are not moving through August, filled with absolute confidence or convinced they have been specially chosen. In many cases, they are questioning themselves more intensely than ever before, because they are making decisions without seeing anyone else make the same ones. They wonder whether they acted too soon. They ask themselves whether they misunderstood the timing. They question whether they released something that should have been held on to a little longer. From their own perspective, they are not leading anyone. They are simply attempting to make the most honest decision available with the understanding they have in that moment. Yet this is precisely how the first wave has always operated. The individuals who eventually become examples rarely recognize that they are becoming examples while the process is unfolding. They continue moving before the road receives approval from the collective. They continue choosing before the outcome becomes attractive to everyone else. They continue walking without anyone standing beside them to guarantee that the direction they selected will ultimately prove correct. Courage is rarely created by certainty. More often, certainty arrives much later, explaining why courage had to come first. As the weeks continue unfolding, something fascinating begins to happen. Other people gradually arrive at the very same decision that once seemed far too early. What originally appeared premature slowly begins to look remarkably wise. The choice that confused everyone eventually becomes the path that others now feel drawn to follow. Only then does the first volunteer begin to understand something that was impossible to see at the beginning. Their uncertainty was never evidence that they had made the wrong decision. It was evidence that they had arrived before the crowd was ready to recognize what was already changing. This creates one of the deepest paradoxes woven into the energy of August. Those who appear the most confident may still be standing exactly where they started, waiting for perfect reassurance that never comes. Meanwhile, the people filled with questions, the ones who continue wondering whether they have understood the moment correctly, may already be carrying the entire month quietly forward through the simple willingness to move before certainty finally catches up with them. That is why the first wave has never been defined by confidence alone. The first wave has never been defined by certainty. Its true signature is far more subtle than confidence, because it is revealed through the willingness to act before confidence has any logical reason to exist. That is what separates those who quietly move first from those who wait for reassurance. By the time the people in the first wave fully understand what they have set into motion, others may already be following the path that was created through those early decisions, even though the ones who walked first never realize they were leaving a trail behind them. This is why being selected is so often misunderstood. Many imagine that selection is the reward itself, the magical point where confusion disappears, life becomes effortless, and every unanswered question suddenly receives a perfect explanation. The truth is almost the opposite. Selection is not the destination. It is the first step into a journey that asks far more from you than you expected. That is exactly why these opening days of August carry such remarkable importance. They are not designed to deliver the final breakthrough. Their purpose is to quietly position certain people before the most significant moments of the month begin unfolding. Everything that follows, including Lion's Gate, the eclipse, and every major energetic shift still waiting ahead, will grow from decisions that are being made right now, long before the larger story becomes visible. Perhaps you finally complete something that has remained unfinished for far too long. Perhaps you release a direction that no longer reflects who you are becoming. Perhaps you accept an opportunity that still appears too modest and too ordinary to deserve much attention. None of those individual choices seem capable of changing an entire life when viewed by themselves. Yet together, they quietly determine where you will be standing once the larger openings begin revealing themselves. Selection does not hand you the finish line. It simply places you at the place where the road is finally able to begin. Many people expect being chosen to arrive wrapped in excitement from the very first moment. They imagine immediate rewards, unmistakable confirmation, and visible signs that they have made the correct decision. Yet the first wave is usually invited into something entirely different. They are asked to accept responsibility before recognition arrives. They are asked to move while certainty still feels distant. They are given a beginning long before they can understand where that beginning is ultimately leading. That is one of the defining characteristics of the first wave. They refuse to remain frozen until every piece of the puzzle fits perfectly together. They understand a truth that many people spend years learning. Movement creates clarity, while endless hesitation creates nothing at all. Very often, the evidence comes after the choice has already been made, because evidence was never intended to make that choice on your behalf. A first wave can only exist because most people fail to recognize it while it is quietly taking shape. If everyone immediately understood that August had already entered a new phase, there would be no first volunteers. Every person would move simultaneously, and the purpose of a first beginning would disappear entirely. That is why these early days possess such extraordinary value, even though they appear so ordinary on the surface. Across countless lives, people are making quiet decisions that seem completely unrelated to one another. Someone finally brings a long period of postponement to an end. Someone gently steps away from a plan that has silently completed its purpose. Someone says yes to an opportunity that still appears too small to attract attention. Each moment looks insignificant when viewed in isolation. None of them seem important enough to become a headline. Then, almost without warning, the rhythm of the month begins accelerating. More people suddenly find themselves changing direction. Opportunities become increasingly visible. Decisions that once seemed almost forgettable begin revealing how meaningful they truly were. The collective notices significance only after it has become impossible to ignore. The first wave recognizes significance while it can still be overlooked without a second thought. By the time everyone else finally acknowledges that something has shifted, the first volunteers have already built the momentum that made the larger movement possible. They acted before there was evidence. They acted before excitement appeared. They acted before there was any explanation that would satisfy those still waiting for certainty. That is where August reveals its quiet urgency. It is not asking you to hurry because of fear or panic. It is reminding you that timing changes the value of every decision. There is an enormous difference between recognizing an opening while it still exists in silence and recognizing the very same opening after the entire world has begun talking about it. When Lionsgate eventually becomes the center of everyone's attention, many people will believe that August has only just begun revealing its power. The first volunteers, however, will understand something completely different. They will know that the real beginning happened much earlier, during the moments almost no one considered important enough to notice. The month did not begin when it became obvious. It began while it was still invisible to nearly everyone. And if you have stayed with me until this moment, I want to sincerely thank you for sharing this journey from beginning to end. Standing within the first wave has never been the easiest place to find yourself, yet it is often the place where new direction quietly comes into existence. Keep moving forward, even if the complete picture has not yet revealed itself. Continue trusting the choices that feel honest today, because their true meaning may not become visible until much later in August. Something meaningful is already beginning to open, even if it has not yet announced itself in dramatic ways. Trust the progress you have already created. Continue taking one genuine step at a time, and allow the path ahead to reveal itself exactly when it is ready. Take good care of yourself.